Can you, I've got to close the door. I'm hosting I'm hosting a webinar with like 1 million people. Hi there.
Hello. Thank you.
Hi.
We're going to wait a little bit, get more people in the room here.
Thank you.
Looks like we got about 6 folks.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
I think we have about 9 folks on right now.
Trying to
It'll be like 15, I think.
Sorry, I don't know if you can hear my kids in the background.
Hello, everybody.
We've all got them, or some of them have them. Kids and dogs.
Some of them are furry, some of them are not.
Some of them are grown up. Mine just ended her flute lesson or her flute practice just in time. You would have been serenaded and it wasn't going to be all that pretty. So.
Yeah, that's like when my son was taking clarinet through the school, but maybe happily he wasn't into it continuing on his own.
I sort of forced the issue, but I don't know how long that will last. We have 11 so far. Do you have any idea, Elisa? I know that Justin's email had suggested folks contact you.
Yeah, I was just looking for my little tally. I think there were about 7 or so folks that followed up. Let me double check.
We have a pretty good size crowd here. I mean, it is only 7 o'clock right now, so.
You want to just give it 2 minutes?
Yeah, let's just give it another. Yeah, exactly. We have our presentation is very short, so I would hate for somebody to miss it for being just a few minutes late.
See, Betty said she was joining, Betty Sato. I don't see her in the list. And Reverend Carroll said he was going to join. I know this also will be recorded so folks can see what they missed if they end up not being able to join us tonight, but
Yes, we are recording just so everybody on the Zoom knows. Here comes Betty. Okay, we have 17.
yeah, there's only, it looks like one person who RSVP'd who isn't on yet, but
Okay.
just like one more minute and then start,
Okay.
if that's okay with folks. Okay, I guess we're at 7:03.
All right, let's do it. Okay.
Do you want me to, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. You, Elisa, you wanna say a few words?
Yeah, I just wanted to say good evening to everybody, and evening to CAG members as well as members of the public who are joining us today, and also thank BART staff who are here to give a little information session and Q&A to CAG members, knowing that we have a CAG meeting coming up on August 3rd. And I think you all, other than giving an overview of all the documents that you've shared at a couple weeks ago, starting a couple weeks ago, we'll run through your timelines and everything as part of the presentation. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. So with that, and we'll be taking notes and listening to the questions, I will turn it over to BART staff.
Okay, thanks, Elisa. Thank you all for giving up your part of your Monday evening for AB 2923 and transit-oriented development. We appreciate all the time you all are volunteering for this effort. I wanted to just start by introducing some of the BART staff who are on the meeting tonight. Kamala Parks is joining us. She is our senior planner at BART, who has been working diligently on Assembly Bill 2923 for the last 2 years with me. And she's going to do a lot of the presentation of the technical guide that we recently released and answer your questions. You probably recognize me. I'm the TOD program manager, Abby Thorne-Lyman. Rachel Factor is on. She's the station planner representing the Berkeley stations. You've seen her before at the first CAG meeting. And then lastly, Shannon Dodge was not able to join us today, but she is the property development officer who will be working on advancing development if that's where we end up going as a result of this effort. So I just wanted to give some logistics. We have about 18 people on the Zoom meeting right now. We would appreciate, it looks like you all have figured out the new Zoom etiquette. You've all got yourselves muted and many of you have your cameras off, which is fine. You're welcome to turn your camera on or off as you choose. I will be moderating the conversation. So if you want to speak, you can either raise your hand if you go to the participants icon. You can do that. I don't know if we have anybody calling in. You can. I don't think we do. But oops. Oh my goodness. Okay, I have not learned Zoom apparently after 4 months. But I will be monitoring the participants in the chat. If you want to use the chat box and register your questions, I think we have a few enough participants that we may be able to do more of a sort of a moderated Q&A where you all are asking your questions in person. But if you are feeling shy or you just don't want to do that, you are welcome to use the chat function and I will read your question aloud for Kamala to answer. Please do let us know your name, and if you have an affiliation, please let us know that as well. We are recording this meeting, so we will be able to share it later on for those CAG members and community members who are not able to attend tonight. So just a little bit of background. I think at this point, most of you on the call are familiar with Assembly Bill 2923, but just in case anybody is not, I just wanted to give a reminder that this was legislation that was adopted by the state of California in 2018, and we have just hit a key milestone, which was July 1st, 2020. The legislation has two components. One is that it requires the rezoning of BART-owned property near stations, certain BART-owned property in 3 counties, to meet certain minimum height density, Florida area ratio and parking requirements. Kamala can speak to you about that. And if you haven't read the technical guide yet, there's oodles of information in there. The BART board had until July 1st, 2020 to consider adopting new zoning standards that would be different than what was in the law. The BART, we opted as BART not to pursue adopting those zoning standards for a number of reasons. One of which was that we felt the zoning standards were about in the right spot for development, that we could not down zone, in essence. We could not go below what was in the law, and we could only go above, and there wasn't really anything that we would get out of that in terms of enhancing feasibility, and the cost benefit analysis just wasn't playing out. So now we are here, and all of our local jurisdiction partners like Elisa know that they must meet what was in the letter of the law for AB 2923. And they have until the deadline of July 1st, 2022 to conform with the law. And if they do not, then the zoning standards become the zoning for the property. We've engaged quite a bit with the jurisdictions, and we've obviously been here with you, the community members. So as a reminder of what applies to both North Berkeley and Ashby BART stations, the zoning must allow 75 units per acre or more, or it can allow more. It must allow the 7-story height, or it can allow more. It must allow a 4.2 Florida area ratio. I discussed this and defined this at the CAG, or it can allow more. Must share or unbundle parking, must allow for that. The local zoning cannot restrict that. No minimum parking requirements for residential or office uses, and no maximum that is less than half a space per residential unit and 1.6 spaces per 1,000 square feet or less. No minimum. And 1 secure bike parking space per unit. We have a lot of milestones and deliverables coming out over the coming months. We're very, very actively working on this. So tonight we're going to focus our efforts on the AB 2923 technical guide. And we also have this mapping and database out that Kamala will speak about. Within another month or so, we're going to be releasing our draft TOD work plan, as well as our travel demand management requirements. The board will be taking up the topic of AB 2923 at its July 23rd board meeting for discussion. and possibly taking it up for action in August, just so everybody knows that. We'll see how the July meeting goes before we commit to August. We want to make sure we have time to do what we need to do. We're doing a lot of other deliverables that are listed here. We can discuss that in Q&A if you'd like, but I really want to get into the technical guide. So I'm going to turn it to Kamala. We cannot hear you.
Maybe unmuting would help. Yeah, you think we would know. Thank you very much for having me. I'm Kamala Parks, as Abby mentioned, and have been working diligently on AB 2923 together with Abby. And I also am a Berkeley native. I grew up there, so I don't live there anymore, but I have a lot of fond memories living 3 blocks from the North Berkeley BART station. So I wanted to mention that we did release a technical guide on June 24th, and comments are due August 7th. And this was a voluntary effort. It was also unfunded. This is something that came out of our extensive outreach that Abby and I did starting spring 2019 and we're still continuing it, meeting with local jurisdictions and other groups to understand what the questions are regarding AB 2923. And one of the other things about the technical guide was that we really wanted to make sure that it was talking about what the zoning envelope is. So as Abby already mentioned, specifically for North Berkeley and Ashby, what allowable is, what the zoning must allow, and also what the requirements are for vehicle and bicycle parking. This technical guide, it's 2 sets of appendices and the online mapping that will show you a little bit of, is available at our easy to remember bart.gov/AB 2923 website. Go ahead. So one question was, since Abby explained that we are using the baseline zoning standards instead of adopting new TOD standards. So these are the baseline standards that was required by AB 2923. Why would we do this technical guide? And so part of it was about clarifying what exactly is the authority that state law says BART has. And we really honed in and laser focused on that authority. We didn't want to overstep our bounds, and we didn't want to go beyond what the law said in this technical guide. And there were also, though, a few gray areas. So referring to number 2, when we're talking about deferring to local definitions when there is interpretation, there were some places where, for example, we didn't have the authority to say this is what it is. So building height is a good example. In the baseline zoning, as Abby mentioned, 7 stories for the Berkeley stations is the limit, but many jurisdictions don't define their height in terms of stories, they define it in terms of feet. And so this is an instance where if a local jurisdiction actually has some sort of conversion factor or some way that they define those stories, that we would accept that as, hey, this is the gray area of the bill, and if you have it already, we'll use yours, and if you don't, here we do put into the bill some ways that we would look at the conversion factors there. And similar to residential density and floor area ratio. So, and I think Abby already discussed some of the issues with floor area ratio and how it doesn't quite align well with the building height and residential density. But again, these are zoning standards, not what's necessarily going to be developed. And in terms of the other thing that the technical guide aims to answer is who's in charge of the conformance with AB 2923, who does the work, who does the determination. So the bill very clearly says that BART makes the determination, but the local jurisdictions will be the ones to demonstrate their conformance by July 1st, 2022. And we are not going to assume they're working in a vacuum. BART has continues to work with our local jurisdictions in a collaborative manner to make sure that it's no surprise on July 1st, 2022, when it comes that where things have been either deficient or whatnot. So we intend to keep up this great relationship that we've developed with 22 jurisdictions, and including those who aren't even part of AB 2923, to make sure that we're keeping each other in check and in line and have a great working relationship. And we feel like when a developer makes a proposal, if there are any issues with the AB 2923 zoning that a city or a county have adopted, that would be the time that things would be cross-checked. So in essence, we will rely on the jurisdictions to say, do the zoning that they need to do for the conformance and say that they're conforming. But really the truth will be in the pudding when we go in to develop, and if there are issues there, then we're going to have to resolve them for AB 2923. Next slide. So just a quick summary of how we approached it. So every chapter, all the chapters 3 through 7 are organized as frequently asked questions or question and answer format, because that's how we gathered the questions and it helped us frame the answers. Chapters 3 through 6 are specific for each zoning criteria or zoning standard. 7 is really about the things that don't fit into those neat categories. So that could be things such as anti-displacement and what's the environmental process and state density bonus. Those things are contained in chapter 7. And hopefully if you've done your homework like you were supposed to, you would know this already, but this gives you a sense of how we organize the key parts of the technical guide. The other exciting thing that we worked on with a technical guide is our station area fact sheet. So when you go online, you'll see there's an appendix 2. And what the station area fact sheets do is for every station that is subject to AB 2923, so those are the ones in Alameda, Contra Costa, and San Francisco County, we did a station area fact sheet. We also included Daly City in that in case you care, because we have property in San Francisco. And what this does, these fact sheets, is it's a snapshot of the BART-owned land, which of that land is subject to AB 2923, what the baseline zoning standards are, what the current zoning was when we did the research, and all of the building heights and the communities of concern within a ½ mile of the station area. And those are related to, especially the communities of concern, where we need to focus some of our outreach. We also have this as a supporting thing, an online map of what is not only AB 2923 eligible property, but also how it intersects with our TOD work plan. So on the left, you can see, for example, North Berkeley and Ashby, and how it works, and you can see the legend, but I'll explain the legend a little bit. The shading refers to whether it's AB 2923 eligible or not, and the outline refers to the TOD work plan and whether it's being considered as part of the universe of parcels. So for example, you'll see North Berkeley has some shading that's green, but outline is red. That means those AB 2923 hems us in. We had to go by the letter of the law, but those are not parcels we're going to consider in the TOD work plan. Similarly, at Ashby, you can see the ones that are clearly green and that you would expect. The red parcels that you see below are shaded red and they're outlined red, meaning they're not AB 2923 from the shading, and the outline is, and of course, is not part of our TOD. Well, in this case, it's not part of our TOD plan because it's not developable. And these are all found at that website I mentioned before, bart.gov/AB 2923. Just a reminder, I know you saw this at the June meeting, but just that the zoning standards that we're talking about in the technical guide do not mean the development that is going to go in. So we wanted to emphasize again the zoning envelope. This is what's allowed versus what a TOD project might look like. And just to remind everyone of that differentiation. So now we can go on to any questions you might have or anything you want to discuss. We told you it was short.
Thanks, Kamala. Looking around, so you can either, oh, Betty, I see your hand raised. You can either raise your hand on the video. I'm going to try to monitor both the video and the participant list, which is going to get overwhelming for me, but I'll do both. So Betty, you want to go ahead first?
Yeah, I just had a quick question clarifying at the North Berkeley lot. I thought that the overflow parking was not included in the TOD, or, you know, they're not considered developable. So do you?
Abby's on mute. There you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so for the green outlines, which is indicating any property that BART might ever consider TOD on in the future, we did include, we used a fairly rigid framework for that. We didn't want to be arbitrary in how we did that. Structurally, it would be very, very challenging to build on it, and as I think we discussed at the CAG, it's considered auxiliary to the effort. Perhaps there would be some reconfiguration of the property. It's not necessarily intended that structures would go on that property, which would be very, very challenging. But in the concept of making a great TOD project that has all the great amenities, we might want to be open to considering some changes to that property to make that happen. It could be like, for example, at past projects, like parking lot restriping is one thing we've done. Just things like that. So yeah, but we did use, as I said, a fairly rigid framework for defining the green outlines, so that we were, because we were really looking long-term, like 100-year, but it is intended that you guys are gonna, through your guidance, give us some parameters for what that will look like.
Okay, thanks.
Blaine.
Thanks, Abby, and thanks for the presentation. Appreciate the chance to hear it. I have a pretty wonky technical question, but can you get into the net versus gross FAR interpretation? So there's some parts of the site that aren't developable, and as I understand it, if I have this right, that would be one way of calculating FAR is taking the entire site. Another way of calculating FAR would be to take the developable portions of the site, and you can get two different FARs from that. I just wondered how you are treating that particular difference.
Yeah, that is a good question, and we've had a lot of internal conversation about it. So from a zoning perspective, it's zoned as 4.2 FAR for the Berkeley ones. And so from a zoning perspective, we're not subdividing the parcels. It is zoned 4.2. So that means that that's the zoning for that parcel, regardless of what kind of BART operations or what part of it is developable. When it gets into the TOD project, that's when we're going to have more of a specified conversation about the FAR and how it relates to how much circulation we need, how much the project affects the BART operations, to then work at how the project would fit in that envelope. As we've mentioned before, there is a mismatch between the FAR and the building heights, as an example. So the FAR tends to be more aggressive, especially on the bigger sites. On the smaller sites, it actually seems to work out pretty well, but on the bigger sites, because we have to have internal circulation, it gets more problematic. So that is basically our approach with the zoning is 4.2 FAR for the whole parcel. We're not subdividing. Then when we get into the TOD project, we will work with the jurisdiction, we'll work with the developer, we'll work with the neighborhood about the FAR and how it fits into the requirements of the bill and making a context sensitive project.
If I could just give a quick example, Elaine, I just want to take an example. You know, we're in the process of working on a development application to the city of Oakland for the Lake Merritt BART station, which does, in fact, it is the other project that has got underground trackway bisecting the property that we're working on. The developer is working to create a paseo in the area over our trackway, so very possibly similar to what could be proposed at the North Berkeley BART station. They would like to include that paseo to fulfill their open space requirement, which means it is going to be part of the project area, which is the component of AB 2923. You define the project area, and then that's what you're submitting to the city. So since we don't know what the project area is going to be, in that case, the developer is building it for us, the developer is maintaining it, and they are fulfilling some other zoning requirements with that property, so it's part of the project. That's going to be something pretty technical that I think is going to come down to the actual application, which I think is just an example of what Kamala is saying. So it sort of depends on who's going to build those, you know, those other things that we're going to need on the site. Did you have a follow-up?
No, I mean, I think that I appreciate the explanation, and sometimes I think maybe these things are easier to understand in the specific examples of them when they come up. I mean, I think what I'm getting at is, you know, have you seen in looking at these properties some way in which maybe the height, you know, and the FAR end up kind of being at odds when you apply these different ways of looking at it? And if you had a sense of really like how much difference are we talking about, if it's sort of like a trivial difference, then it's probably not worth discussing a whole lot in the abstract. But if you're starting to see like, oh yeah, we like when we get down to a certain size parcel, we really see like a difference in a whole story or something, I could see that coming up in the CAG as something that like becomes a subject of conversation. So I was just kind of curious like how big of a deal it was.
Yeah, you know, we have been running some very, very high level numbers of how does the math work if you put a building of X size on here? What does the math translate to in terms of an FAR? And that's how we did discover, you know, if we own a parcel in Hayward that's about 2 acres, and you could just plop a building down with no internal circulation. And as Kamala said, that's about, when you do about a 7-story building there, it's about 4.2 FAR. But you start adding internal streets and, you know, paseos and other, you know, plazas, and then all of a sudden you're not able to hit that 4.2. And it's been, you know, some of our case studies got as low as like a 3.0 FAR or 2.8 FAR. And so this is something we're really watching. I think Elisa is working with the consultant team to do some of this math again for you know, for you guys. But we know that it's going to be, it is incongruous, the height and the FAR. And so the trick of that, and the thing that we really are paying attention to, is that there is actually, I'm just gonna, since we're on this topic, and Charles, I do see you have your hand raised, so you're next in line.
Well, Anthony Corman actually had a chat, so we should probably.
Oh, okay, all right. So we'll move on soon, but there is a section here in AB 2923 that says that if local design standards, in essence, I'm going to read it. It's here. You can read the actual text, but in essence, local design standards cannot prohibit those 4 zoning standards. So what that means to me is if we already can't hit that 4.2 FAR on a big site, we're going to have to figure out how to work with the CAG and the community and the city to come up with design expectations that are not necessarily embedded in the zoning, And that's where I think, you know, when Elisa was showing the flow chart of what the outcome is of your work, that's where that's going to be so important, is that we need to work with you to make sure that the CAG is coming up with something that's going to be workable for the community, that is not necessarily just the rigid framework of zoning, but some other agreement between BART and the city to make a project that actually looks great. So.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate the explanation.
Anthony.
Okay, Anthony, do you want me to just read this off? Chime in if you don't. Is there new information in the guidance document that isn't in AB 2923 or the MOU or BART TOD guidelines? As far as I can tell, it's a summarizing document. Yeah, that's actually a great question. Kamala, do you want to give a brief response?
Sure. I think that, again, we really tried to stick with the letter of the law for AB 2923. And I'd say the only new information is how we're going to pursue, what is our process with conformance, as well as when local kind of conversion factors or other things that were gray areas in the bill in terms of interpretation. That's, I feel like, is new, in that the bill couldn't give us the answer, but we felt like we had to provide some guidance as to, like, well, what do you do when you're building height in feet and not stories? And so when that appeared in the bill, we really tried to delineate in the document, in the technical guide, hey, the bill is silent on this or doesn't give guidance, so here's what we suggest. And we generally go for, if your local standards say something, use that. If you already have a conversion factor, use that. If not, here's some suggestions if you don't have this in your zoning. So, and I think the appendices and the online mapping are pretty, if I can kind of toot our own horn, I think are really incredible pieces of information for anyone out there who's interested in even what land BART owns.
Okay, Charles?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. This is a question I've asked a couple of times, and that is, I'm wondering how much BART is going to make off of this project. And the second part of that question would be, if BART takes less profit for themselves, would that allow for more low and low income housing? Thank you.
Those are great questions, Charles, and I think Abby has some great answers for you.
Well, so as you know, BART is in a bit of a financial crisis at the moment, and certainly one of the 6 goals of BART's transit-oriented development policy is to generate revenue from its TOD projects to support its operations. That said, we were not clear on the direction the board wanted to head with this very question. What is BART's financial return expectation? So we brought it as a policy question to the board on April 23rd of this year. And the board adopted an amendment to the TOD policy allowing for a discount of fair market value of up to 60% for projects that are at least 35% affordable, which I think both projects would be at on both sites. And the deeper, we're expecting the typical discount to come in at about 30% of 30% discount from fair market value for just an average affordable housing project that is serving households of the incomes that an average affordable housing project does, which is about 46 to 60% of the area median income. That's about the average that most projects serve. But if a project has a lot of extremely low income units, if a project is serving a lot of special needs populations or formerly homeless individuals and serving a much lower income, that's where we're willing to do a much deeper discount. So we'll work with the developer on the negotiation there. Around your second question of does that result in more units? We hope so. Nobody's really tested this yet, but what we're really hoping is that what we can help do is fill that. There's this gap that is roughly, a local government right now in this climate is having to step in with subsidy of between $150,000 and $200,000 per unit. Now I say right now, pre-COVID, we don't know quite what's going to happen with construction costs, but it is hard to make an affordable housing project pencil if you don't have that local subsidy. And certainly BART's contribution will make some level of dent and will help leverage and make the project more competitive for state and federal funds. It's not going to be the end all be all. It's not the silver bullet, but it can at least help a little bit. Okay, I don't see any other virtual hands raised.
This is Haley. My hand is up.
Oh, okay, Haley. I don't see you on the video, so thank you for speaking.
Oh, sorry. My virtual hand is up.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to clarify, something you said, Abby, about like, well, there's this discrepancy here between what the law says or what the state law says and what the local law says. And that's where the CAG would need to kind of help come up with a creative solution. I'm wondering if there's been any further thinking or help clarifying what some of those other ones are, because what I'm trying to do is put together the technical information that you're giving in this guide that's been really helpful with with where the big discussion points are going to be. And I think Blaine pointed or was asking if that was going to be one of them. And so I was wondering if you could provide any more insight on where those like pain points might be that this technical guidance could be really helpful.
That's a great question. I think that what I would first say is I think there's been a lot of concern about how BART is planning to approach AB 2923, and I think this is kind of speaking to what Kamala said earlier. We intentionally made this approach of there are not a lot of surprises in this document, because we are following the letter of the law, and we don't consider the state to have given us the legal authority to make interpretations that were not in the law. So as such, I don't think there are a lot of, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question or not, so you'll just have to tell me, but there's not a lot of new technical information in here that you couldn't have gotten if you'd read the legislation and known a lot about zoning. But if you don't know a lot about zoning, I'm hopeful that you will find this document helpful, because it will explain some things to you about zoning that you just had no way of knowing before, as perhaps not a trained planner or architect. So I'd say in the technical guide, there's not a lot of areas where we say, hey, BART Berkeley CAG, look at this section of the technical guide because it's really pertinent to you. But it's more sort of, and I think I'm hoping Elisa and the city staff have found it helpful of just, hey, how are you going to deal with this? And we're able to say, oh, well, here, it's in this document, it's here. But Elisa, you took yourself off mute, so I'm wondering if you had anything.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I mean, I think, Haley, you're putting your finger right on the issue in the sense that, for example, I think that the questions around, dwelling unit per acre, height, stories, FAR, let's see, FAR, and I think those are the big ones that what we really want to come back, look a little deeper at what is in this BART technical document, and also come back to the CAG with, this is how the city defines it, because there are, as Kamala said, and maybe Abby also, like there's deference to if this local jurisdiction has a definition for it, to use that definition, but there still may be some gaps. For example, like the city of Berkeley doesn't use a density standard, doesn't have dwelling units per acre. And that's something that we've been introducing through the Adeline corridor process. But, through this process, if we use that, we'll have to refine, and define what, density is, gross and net density. we have definitions in the code for height and stories, and we might need to, you know, refine that because there are differences in different zones. We have a definition for FAR, but will in the BMC in the definition section. But I also want to do a little more digging in terms of what we've done in specific cases where there might be, and you know, easements or, you know, undevelopable areas, and whether there's, because the code says one thing, but I'm just curious in practice what, you know, what has been done in those cases. So I think what we'll have to do, you know, at the next CAG meeting or the next couple CAG meetings is just to come back to you with, you know, this comparison of like this, these are where now that we have this document, you know, and this is what the city definitions are, and sort of try to see where there are things that we need to fill in, or we can, you know, and then have a better understanding of again, like this is definitely what can go in the zoning bucket versus if AB 2923 doesn't allow to deviate this, then we can keep on having a more refined discussion around actual project RFP development parameters. Is that helpful?
And if I could just add one thing too, is that we could refer to them as pain points, but I think part of it is because the bill is talking more about allowable for much of this, rather than you have to build a minimum of 7 stories and you have to build a minimum FAR of 4.2. I'm not sure that it's necessarily a pain point that they're not aligned, just because it's not, they're about allowing as opposed to this is the minimum, like you have to build to this. So I think that's an area of, I think it was a bit of a surprise as we were looking at the bill a little more, that it is about the allowable as opposed to you have to build a project that meets this.
This is helpful, and if I could add one follow-up about that particular one in terms of density is there a, because it is allowable and not a minimum, is there a advantage or disadvantage to having a bigger allowable, which just gives, to me, would give more flexibility to the developer when there's actually a design, versus like, is there a trade-off we need to be considering? And maybe that's beyond the scope of this conversation, but that's what's coming up for me and the kind of thing I want to be able to respond to.
Yeah, if I could speak to that for a minute, Haley, and this is where, you know, we are working hard. Nicole Franklin, who is also on the property development staff with me, is hovering on this call because we are imminently publishing our TOD work plan, which is the document where we will actually set out how we are planning to prioritize our sites, because we have a lot of properties, and in fact, we actually have a lot of interested jurisdictions. And one of the areas that just to drop a little preview for you, one of the areas that we're looking at in terms of prioritization, you know, we have this 3-point prioritization framework that we came out with in February, which is market feasibility for TOD, can you build it today? Local support, and implementation barriers, or infrastructure costs is what we're calling it now. And what Nicole and I have developed is, as we've been talking about what it means to have local support, one of the things that we've been falling on is you know, the density here is pretty low. And we set 1 bar for density for the entire BART system, with the anticipation that this might be the density we get in Antioch or Pittsburgh or Concord. And we'd like to see the density actually align with what is possible in a jurisdiction. So that is an area I think where you could go higher as the CAG. And where BART's statement to the city of Berkeley is, we would like you to go higher. We know that you are achieving projects along University Avenue and San Pablo Avenue, and in South Berkeley that are 150 units to the acre, or are 135 units to the acre. And so we'd like to see something a little bit more intense. We don't want Berkeley to be at the low bar. And if Berkeley wants to be high on our list of development opportunities, we are going to be asking you in that document to go higher. Nicole, did you want to add anything? Or
Good evening, everybody. I just would just like to tag on what Abby said. We're going to develop properties, be respectful of the environments and the neighborhoods, and get your input on that. But the BART properties are once in a lifetime opportunity to build. Sorry, the cat wanted to visit. All right. He never visits until I'm on Zoom for a call. So they are, once in a lifetime opportunities. And one of our goals is to create density so that we can build ridership and contribute to communities with housing opportunities. So, in the core system, we would like to go denser.
Yeah. I see David Ushijima.
We have some chat questions too.
Okay. Well, David, how about you hop on first, and then we'll get to the chat.
Okay, I'd like to just kind of revisit the point that Elisa made, which was currently Berkeley doesn't really have a density standard. So there are a number of discussions on how to create an objective density standard. And as you mentioned, the 75 units per acre identified in your study is at the fairly low end currently. But when you compare it to 135 to 150, which is on university, it's a totally different environment. I would say probably closer to what's at Ashby, but certainly not what's at North Berkeley. So between now and, is there a deadline in which an objective standard would have to be developed for density in order to, align with your plans? That's my question.
I think that would, yeah, I think that would really happen through this CAG process and through the zoning, Elisa, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So it's not a deadline per se in terms of the work plan or prioritization, but that's something we will be revisiting, as we go along. We're not locking in stone anytime soon which of BART's properties will be developed next. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
A couple of questions from the chat here. So Anthony, beyond the parameters specified in the law for zoning, are there considerations that the CAG should or may want to develop recommendations for? If so, can we get specific guidance on what they might be, or conversely, should our focus be solely on the zoning parameters specified in the law? Oh yes, there are more. There are more recommendations we want from you than just the zoning parameters. And I'm gonna turn this to Elisa to start, because I know you've been doing a lot of thinking about this.
Yeah, we appreciated that question from the June 8th CAG meeting, just around like what are the CAG deliverables, and was fully intending to talk about that at the next CAG meeting. But in short, we look to like the MOU, which really talks about a broader set of things, basically the zoning as well. And I guess this gets to the slide that, again, that we talk about, where there's the zoning that's consistent with AB 2923. And then there's this other body of development parameters that we might not be able to put in the zoning because of AB 2923, but would be appropriate to put in an RFP or RFQ for developers for projects at either station. So, so I think we will, soon be able to articulate, what is that bucket, since it appears that AB 2923 is, fairly inflexible about what we must allow in the zoning. We'll be able to talk more about, if that's the case, then what else do we need to have in an RFP, RFQ to give guidance to developers that meet the parameters of the community documents, the policies, as well as BART's parameters around, what Rachel Factor had presented at the last CAG meeting around project feasibility, ridership, sustainability, et cetera, that I don't have totally committed to memory. But so, and then lastly, there is a joint vision and priorities document that that the CAG will be able to, you know, also provide input about, which presumably would be included in the RFP, RFQ, any RFP, RFQs in the future as well. Does that answer your question? And we'll definitely elaborate on that at the next CAG meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Elisa. I think that was great. And I think that I was going to raise that from just from the BART point of view, that our end goal is to get to a mutually agreeable set of development parameters that, as Elisa said, go in an RFP, RFQ. And there is, aside from the BART board, which is our elected body and is going to be, you know, for us, the most important voice in guiding us, you all are also our CAG. You're BART's CAG too. And that's why we tried really hard in the first meeting why Rachel really worked hard to lay out what we needed at a minimum to make this into a workable project. We really wanted to lay out BART's goals for this early on so that you all could build the structure that's going to go on top of that. So I'm just going to check the chat to see, Tony, if you're okay. Yes, thanks. He says yes, thanks. Great. Okay. Sorry, I'm obviously new to the Zoom facilitation here. Okay, Amy, just a reminder that public transit serves the lower income population more than it serves the wealthier population who have more transit options open to them. BART's profit from housing will be beneficial to a broad general population, especially lower income people, in keeping public transit services operational and effective. Trying to take away BART's profit from housing takes away transit funding that benefits the same demographic of people that we are hoping to help with low-income housing, but transit serves more people than the limited number of people who directly occupy the low-income units. Does BART have personal accounts of perceptions of successes or regrets in regards to other housing at developed BART stations? It's all just only success. No, we definitely have regrets. Wow, that's a tough question. You know, I think the one thing for us is that we've developed some fabulous projects. We started it though in the early 90s when the development world was very different and the perception of transit-oriented development was kind of a new thing. So we have a lot of very low density townhomes on our site. You know, there's less than 50 housing units in the Fruitvale Transit Village. You know, it's a 2 to 3 story building. And even the next phase that is now occupied and soon to be under construction is 4 stories. And, you know, this is a once in a lifetime shot, as Nicole said, like we get one shot at this. And so from our point of view, I think the uses, and we want the great placemaking, we want places that everybody in the community can use, but we also do want to acknowledge that once we've ground leased this, it's going to be up for a century. And that's, you know, there's hundreds of millions of dollars of transit operations running under these property or under or adjacent to these projects. So we want to just make sure we get what makes sense for the next century. Nicole, did you want to add anything? She's working on a lot of our TOD projects right now as well.
You know, I think that captures it because, you know, BART's role is not just a transit operator for the region. You know, we play, you know, we have multiple hats and it's providing connectivity, you know, through BART trains, but it's also getting cars off the road. And it's also working with communities like yours to make the community more vibrant, add more services. And I think that, like, even though Fruitvale is a great example of transit-oriented development for the prior decade, what we're looking at now is something that's more opportunistic and more aspirational, so that we can provide more homes. And so I think that's what we're asking, you know, of communities like yours. We want to maintain the character of your communities, but to build upon that.
All right, so I think that's it for the chat box. Back to the raised hands here. Charles, yours is still raised from before, right? Yeah, okay. All right, does anyone else, I don't see anything else, but I am obviously not doing my best job here at seeing hands. So Did anyone else have any other questions or points that they wanted to make before we wrap up? So you all know where to find us. We'll be at your next CAG meeting. I did just want to flip to our contact information here. My and Kamala's email addresses are at the top here. Please do reach out. You've got all the links to both the AB 2923 documents that Kamala has laid out that exist today, as well as the TOD program in general. And we do send all of our email alerts. I think Elisa and Justin are going to be probably providing you with updates as we go along. But if you don't want to miss a beat, you can sign up for email alerts at BART.gov. And then when you select your topics, you can select TOD projects and you will not miss anything. And I'll just speak to some of the things that are coming up that you might not hear so much about. We are imminently releasing a request for qualifications for the El Cerrito Plaza BART station. So you might be interested to see that when that hits the streets. It might give you a sense of, what this could be. The board recently approved the West Oakland development. So we've got a lot of, we're always very active in the program. We have a lot of projects going forward. And so you can hear those other announcements about other projects. So and Elisa has also chatted in the box that you can email comments and questions to BART Planning at cityofberkeley.info. The AB 2923 website also gives you the opportunity to comment on the technical guide, which is still in draft. So, if there's things you see in there, questions that we missed, clarifications that you found confusing, Kamala and I want to know. So.
Can I mention something, Abby?
Yes.
I just wanted to say to everyone, in preparation for the next CAG meeting on Monday, August 3rd, we'll send out materials a week prior, but after hearing this session, if you have questions about, other things that you'd like answered related to this or something like that, please be sure to send them to BART Planning. And we'll definitely share out, compile and share out information about, the new RFPs and things that are related to this process. There'll be good resources or, reference documents to the CAG as well.
Great. So please feel free to join us at the BART board meeting next Thursday if you want more of this. You just can't get enough.
Yeah.
With that, I think we'll wrap it up unless anyone has any final parting words. We really appreciate you taking some time out of your evening tonight. And thanks, to those of you who have scoured our document. We really appreciate it because it took us a lot of time to write, and it's nice to know when people are reading what you wrote. So, and we'll be, very actively in touch.
Thank you, everyone, for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good evening and take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.